I never thought I'd see his face again, at least not like this. Not across a courtroom with 2 lawyers between us and a stack of financial records that read like a eulogy for our marriage. He looked so calm sitting there in his custom-tailored suit, flipping through paperwork like he wasn't trying to strip away what little I had left. I remember thinking he doesn't even blink, like I was just another line item on his balance sheet. He was suing me for half of everything after everything. After I gave him the best years of my life. After I helped build the company from the ground up. After I walked away without a fight, thinking that maybe, just maybe, I could still leave with a shred of dignity. But that's not how he works. He always needs to win, even if it means rewriting history. I met him when we were both nobodies. I was working a desk job, I hated juggling student loans, and a dream I didn't dare say out loud. He had big ideas and zero follow-through, but God, he was magnetic. When he talked, you believed, and I did. I believed in him so hard I started believing in myself just by standing next to him. We were inseparable, partners in everything. He pitched the vision, and I made it real. I handled the incorporation, wrote the contracts registered, the domains filed the taxes. He was the one shaking hands and making speeches, but I was the one keeping the lights on. I didn't mind staying in the background. Not at first. It felt romantic building something together. Like we were forging a future out of pure grit and caffeine. We lived out of our car for a few months, rotating cheap motels and takeout meals. I managed every dollar like it was our last. I cut costs, negotiated vendor deals, automated payroll from my laptop, while he was out pitching investors. And then the money came. The buzz, the first big article. Suddenly, people were calling him a visionary, a genius, self-made, they said. I didn't correct them. I stayed quiet when they forgot to mention me on panels. I smiled through meetings where I was introduced as his wife instead of co-founder. I thought it didn't matter. I thought we were a team, that everything we built was ours. But things started to change. He stopped coming home at night. He started hiring new people, people who didn't know our history, who treated me like I was just some meddling spouse who wandered into the office too often. I'd suggest things, and he'd wave me off with a tired smile. That's not really your area, he'd say. Or worse, you should take a break. You've been stressed lately. Stressed. Of course I was stressed. I was watching the company I helped build shift out from under me like sand through a sieve. But I stayed. I thought if I worked harder, if I became more indispensable, he'd remember who I was, what I'd done, what we'd done together. The meetings became private. The decisions started happening without me. When I questioned it, he said I was paranoid, that I was too emotional, that I didn't understand the scale the business was reaching. One night, I found out he'd formed a new holding company without telling me. When I asked him why, he just said, "It's cleaner this way." I told him I didn't feel like a partner anymore. He didn't even hesitate, didn't look up from his drink. He just said, "Because you're not." That night, we argued in the kitchen, our kitchen in the house, that was only possible because of years of sacrifice. I told him I wanted back in, that I wanted transparency, that I was tired of being shut out of something I helped create. He turned to me slow and deliberate with that look on his face, the one he always gave me when he thought I was being naive. "Everything here is mine," he said, voice calm, almost gentle. "You're just the wife." The silence after that was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Just the wife. I stood there frozen as if my entire body had turned to glass. Not because it was the first time I felt small, but because he finally said it out loud. Everything I had feared, everything I had tried. Not to admit to myself it was all true. I wasn't his partner. I wasn't even a person in his world anymore. I was an accessory, a story he could edit out. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just walked away. I packed a bag that night and left. I didn't take much, just the documents that still had my name on them. A few drives, a list of passwords I'd memorized by heart. I left the rest, the house, the clothes, the illusion. I thought I was walking away with nothing, but I didn't know then what I had just taken with me would be enough to burn his empire to the ground. After that night, I didn't try to fix anything. I didn't beg, didn't scream, didn't cling to a future that was already gone. I simply disappeared. The divorce was clean. That's the word everyone used, clean. I signed what needed to be signed. I didn't contest the terms. I didn't fight over the house or the cars or the accounts he'd already drained behind my back. I let him keep the facade he'd built our life, repackaged as his solo achievement. All I asked for was a modest payout and my original shares, the ones that still bore my name on paper, the ones I had proof I contributed to from day one. He was almost smug about it, as if I'd finally fallen in line, as if I'd accepted my place as just the wife and was quietly exiting stage left. But I wasn't retreating, I was recalibrating. I used that small payout to rent a one-bedroom apartment across the city. No luxury, no hardwood floors or marble countertops, just silence, just space. And for the first time in years, my own name on the lease. I tried to rebuild quietly, focused on consulting projects, freelancing, cleaning up the wreckage of my professional identity. I was slowly making peace with the idea that I wouldn't get recognition for what I helped build, but at least I had my freedom. And then, 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a letter. He was suing me. Apparently, he'd discovered I still held a minority stake in the company, something that was never contested in our divorce agreement. But now he claimed those shares were obtained under false pretenses, that I had no right to them since I hadn't contributed to the company in any meaningful way. It was surreal, like watching someone light a match over your lifeboat after they'd already sunk your ship. But what shocked me wasn't the lawsuit. It was what I found when I looked deeper. My lawyer, a quiet but razor-sharp woman named Carla, started digging. And what we uncovered made everything fall into place. 2 weeks before the divorce was filed, he'd quietly transferred multiple business assets, real estate holdings, equipment, even intellectual property into a secondary company. A shell corporation, the name on the papers, his assistant. The same assistant who had been glued to his side the past year, the one who used to look at me with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. He'd hidden the assets, diluted my remaining ownership, and restructured the board so I had no real voting power left. And now he was dragging me into court to take the scraps he hadn't already stolen. The arrogance of it all was almost laughable. Almost. His legal team built a narrative I was the bitter ex-wife trying to milk a man who had built an empire on his own. They painted me as a dependent, a leech. The media picked it up. CEO battles gold-digging ex in courtroom drama. I was suddenly tabloid fodder, a nameless silhouette next to his polished photo. He knew exactly what he was doing. He always did. See, I understood the game. He wasn't just trying to take my shares. He was trying to erase me from the business, from the story, from the very foundation we'd poured our 20s into. And to the outside world, it looked like he was winning. I stayed silent, not because I was weak, but because silence gives you room to listen. And when you listen long enough, you start hearing where the cracks are. Cracks in his story. Cracks in the structure. Cracks in his own overconfidence. So I started gathering, not evidence for court yet, but information, contacts, digital trails, patterns in ownership transfers. I hired a forensic accountant. I called in favors from people who still remembered who I was before he recast me as an accessory. And while he stood on stages and gave interviews about resilience and leadership and earning your place at the table, I was building something underneath him. Something solid, something quiet, something sharp. Let him think I was licking my wounds. Let him think I'd go down quietly. Because the truth is, I didn't want half of what he had. I wanted all of it, not out of greed, but because I earned it. And I was done letting anyone forget that. I knew exactly where to start. There was one person who remembered. One person who saw the real numbers when no one else was paying attention. Someone who wasn't dazzled by charisma or distracted by titles. Someone who never cared who got the credit, only that the books balanced. His name was Howard. He was the first accountant we ever hired, back when the company couldn't afford proper desks, let alone a CFO. Howard was already past retirement age even then. Gruff, old-fashioned, annoyingly precise, but honest, incorruptible. And he had this way of looking at numbers like they were people. like they told stories. Back in those early years, I used to stay after meetings with him, cross-checking every receipt, tracking every penny. He was the one who showed me how to structure investment ledgers, how to separate founder contributions from operating income, how to make sure no one could ever rewrite the story later unless you let them. I hadn't seen him in almost 6 years. He was slower now, more stooped than I remembered. But his handshake was still firm, and his eyes were still clear. When I told him what had happened about the divorce, the lawsuit, the shell company, he didn't say anything for a long time. Just nodded slowly, and then asked me a single question. "Do you still have the original founder ledger I made you sign?" I did. He smiled, then stood up, shuffled over to an old filing cabinet, and pulled out a thick folder wrapped in rubber bands. Inside were copies, handwritten notes, digital backups on CDs, transaction records dating back to our very first month. There it was, line-by-line proof that the initial funding came from my personal savings, that the intellectual property rights were filed in both our names, that the software license was bought with my credit card, that his first marketing campaign was reimbursed from my account. It was all there, undeniable, time-stamped, audit-proof, and not just from Howard. I found emails from vendors who remembered working with me directly, old staff who were hired through my HR process, legal documents I had filed in my own name during the first year before he even knew what an EIN number was. I wasn't just the wife, I was the co-architect of everything he now claimed as his own. I spent the next 3 weeks quietly assembling a response. Not just a legal rebuttal to his claims, but a timeline. A narrative built on hard data, signed invoices, archived emails, notarized contracts. With Howard's help, I had a paper trail that could unravel his entire version of the truth. But I didn't file it, not yet, because I wanted him to feel untouchable. I wanted him to keep talking to the press, to keep telling people I was irrelevant. I wanted him to believe his own lies so deeply, so publicly, that when the truth came out, there would be no walking it back. I watched as he posted smug photos with his new team, the ones who thought they were building something revolutionary, not realizing they were just standing on stolen ground. I watched as his legal team got cockier, more aggressive, sending letters leaking selective quotes to journalists, painting me as a bitter woman who couldn't move on. And I said nothing. I just waited. I waited while his hubris inflated. I waited while his arrogance filled the air like a gas leak. Because I knew something he didn't, I knew where the fuse was, and I knew exactly when to light it. I knew where the fuse was. I just didn't expect the fire to come from another direction entirely. While Carla the lawyer worked on building the case with Howard's documents, I kept digging into the assets he tried to bury. Most of it was standard legal gymnastics, shifting intellectual property into shell companies, bundling assets into new holding structures, cutting me out of board decisions. But then something didn't fit. One of the shell companies tied to the main transfer, the one holding the most valuable trademarks, had a different billing address. I assumed it would lead back to his lawyer, or one of the junior partners, but it didn't. It led to a downtown office building I recognized instantly. It was the same building where he used to have me wait in the lobby during private meetings. At first I thought it was just another holding name, a placeholder, but then I saw the operating agreement, and that's when my breath caught in my chest. The signature at the bottom wasn't his, it was hers. Alyssa, the assistant, his right hand, the woman who used to call me Mrs. H with that overly sweet smile, the one who sent me floral arrangements on my birthday when he forgot, the one I once hugged during our holiday party and said thank you for taking care of him. She hadn't just taken care of him, she had taken everything. The shell company, the one that now technically owned 40% of our original business, was in her name. She was listed as CEO, beneficiary, primary shareholder. And more than that, she was using the loan secured from our old company's line of credit to build a new venture in her own image. A direct competitor. Same industry, same investors, same back-end structure, because I built that back-end and she copied it line for line. And he gave it to her while I was still married to him. For 2 years, he'd been handing her pieces of the company I helped create. secretly grooming her to replace me in every room, business bedroom, and now legacy. I remember sitting at my desk staring at the filing, unable to move. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't even blink. It was like my body shut down to stop the pain from hitting all at once. Because this wasn't just betrayal, this was desecration. He didn't just fall in love with someone else. He didn't just lie. He built a new life, a new version of our company, while smiling at me across dinner tables and pretending I still mattered. He let me walk out of our marriage with barely anything, because he had already given my half to her. My mind replayed every sign I ignored. Every time she answered his phone late. Every weekend he said he was networking. Every shift in his mood when he came home smelling like expensive perfume that wasn't mine. I thought the pain would come as a sharp break, but it didn't. It came slowly, quietly, like watching water flood under a locked door. You don't realize how deep it is until it's too late to move. I wasn't just erased, I was replaced. And yet, in that moment, numb-stunned, stripped of the last illusions, I felt something strange. Not grief, not rage. Silence. Like something inside me had finally stopped waiting to be seen. The version of me that loved him, she died that day. The version that stayed quiet, gone. The version that tried to win fairly, to keep her head high and her name clean. She packed her bags and left without a sound. What remained was someone else, someone who didn't beg, someone who didn't flinch, someone who had nothing left to lose and therefore everything to build. I wasn't angry, I was clear, because now it wasn't just about justice, it was about correction. He tried to destroy my name, so I would take back his. I knew I couldn't confront him the way he expected. Men like him are built for battles in boardrooms, press statements, flashy counterattacks. They thrive when you go loud because loud makes you look bitter, emotional, unstable. It gives them exactly what they need to dismiss you. So I didn't go loud, I went invisible. I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Madison Ward. We were close in college, both sharp and quietly ambitious, but our lives took different turns. She became a consultant in sustainable infrastructure, ethical, cautious, clean. Everything I needed for what I was about to build. I asked her for a favor, a legal favor. I need to register a company under your name, I told her. It won't involve you. It won't touch your credit. I just need your face on paper. She didn't ask why. She just said, tell me where to sign. The company had no branding, no office, no staff, just structure. We set up an LLC in Delaware with layers of privacy between the ownership and me. Behind it, I established a series of investment accounts, small, fragmented, nearly untraceable if you didn't know what to look for. I wanted every move to seem like market noise, nothing more. The target was simple minority shareholders in his company. People I once knew, angel investors, early supporters, partners who had joined during the rise, and now silently regretted it. His empire had begun to show cracks. Profits were flattening. Internal turnover was growing. He tried to mask it with PR campaigns, but numbers don't lie. And scared investors always leave quietly. One by one they did. Small holdings. 5% here, 3% there. Nothing that would make headlines. But I was watching, and I was buying. Through Madison's name, I offered just above market price. Enough to tempt, not enough to trigger alarms. Some took days to accept. Others said yes before I could finish the sentence. 3 months in, we had 9%. By month 6, we crossed 21. I never celebrated, not once. I didn't smile, didn't toast, I just kept going. Like it was math, like it was therapy. At 30%, I started receiving inquiries. Soft ones at first, emails from board liaisons. Requests for introductory calls from private equity scouts who had noticed Madison Ward LLC was growing its stake in a company they'd once backed. But I stayed in the shadows. Madison played her role, polite, unassuming, all business. When asked about vision or strategy, she said only this: we believe in long-term integrity and quiet correction, and somehow that was enough. By the time we hit 38%, the company's leadership reached out directly. They wanted to extend an invitation to the next annual board meeting, not as a guest, as a potential strategic partner. That's when I paused, not out of fear, but because I knew he still had no idea. He thought I was gone, broken, or worse, harmless. He had no clue that the woman he dismissed as just the wife now sat behind the single largest private voting block in his company. He didn't know I'd been watching, he didn't know I'd been building, and now I wasn't knocking at the door, I had the key. The boardroom hadn't changed much. Same polished mahogany table, same generic art on the walls, like someone tried to make the space feel less predatory. I remembered every inch of it, right down to the uneven vent that always hummed louder than it should. I used to sit here quietly taking notes while he led meetings, back when I still thought we were building something together. But this time I wasn't sitting in the corner. I was at the head of the table. Madison had done her part. The legal proxies were in place. My lawyer Carla sat beside me, expression unreadable folders, stacked neatly like weapons ready for deployment. The room filled slowly. Shareholders, department heads, board members. They made polite small talk, glanced at me with faint curiosity, but no recognition. To them, I was just the acquisition rep from Madison Ward, LLC, another investor with a tailored suit and a quiet demeanor. And then he walked in, my ex-husband, confident, relaxed, smiling that smug half-smile he always wore when he thought he was the smartest man in the room. His assistant, his mistress followed, 2 steps behind, holding a sleek leather folio like she'd earned it. He scanned the room, greeting people by name, nodding at familiar faces. His eyes landed on me. Nothing. Not a flicker of recognition. It was almost insulting. The meeting was called to order. They started with quarterly reports, numbers that dipped lower than expected. Projections slashed quietly, investor concerns deflected with buzzwords and polished slides. He spoke with practiced ease, brushing past the company's declining momentum like it was just market turbulence. And then came the agenda item, strategic acquisition proposal. All eyes turned to me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't posture. I simply slid a folder across the table. Carla opened it, pulled out the documents, and began distributing them one by one. Detailed records of founder capital contributions, trademarks registered in my name, original IP licensing agreements, early ledgers notarized by Howard, our first accountant. My ex leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Then Carla spoke. We believe these documents clarify our client's foundational role in this company. Before any transfer of power or funding occurs, we request full legal acknowledgement of her contributions and ownership history. He went pale. He reached for the papers, flipping through them with increasing speed. Page after page, year after year, evidence he thought had vanished. Evidence he tried to erase. But that wasn't the end. I slid a second folder across the table. Inside was a buyout offer, precise, ruthless, generous enough to tempt, but low enough to sting. A calculated strike. I looked around the room and finally spoke. This company was once built on vision, loyalty, and effort. It's now bleeding value under poor leadership and inflated ego. I'm offering to buy out the remaining minority stakes today at the current valuation. Murmurs, raised eyebrows, nervous glances. I continued, you can either watch your investment dissolve slowly or walk away with something now. I didn't look at him when I said it. I didn't need to. Half the room immediately started doing math in their heads. They'd seen the numbers. They knew the downturn wasn't just a phase, it was the result of ego-driven decisions, bad press, unstable leadership. He stood up suddenly, trying to retake control. This is absurd, he snapped. This woman has no legal standing. She's... I turned to him, slow and calm. I'm not here to fight, I said. I'm here to finish. The room went silent. Because they knew. They finally understood. I wasn't just another investor. I was the ghost of the company's past, the one they buried under branding and press kits. And now I was back with paperwork power and precision. Votes were cast, some abstained. But just enough hands went up, tired investors, disillusioned stakeholders, quiet allies. Majority ruled. The buyout moved forward. The moment the final vote was cast, something in him snapped. He stood so fast his chair slammed into the wall hands, striking the table hard enough to knock over a glass of water. "You can't do this," he shouted. "This is still my company. I built this." No one moved. No one stood to defend him. The room, the same room where he once commanded applause, just watched him unravel. Silent, detached. He turned to the board looking for backup, for sympathy, for someone, anyone to agree with him. But it was already done. The buyout passed. The signatures were final. Control was transferred. And I was now the majority stakeholder, the decision maker, the final word. He tried to storm out, but not before turning back with that glare, the one that once might have shaken me. Now it barely registered. Because the truth was, he didn't lose the company today. He lost it the moment he chose ego over partnership. The moment he erased my name from the narrative and thought I'd stay quiet forever. That afternoon, I made 3 decisions. First, I filed the paperwork to change the company's name. The old brand was bloated with scandal, ego, and fiction. It needed to be gutted, rebuilt from the ground up. Second, I terminated Alyssa. No press release, no drama, just a quiet HR memo, a deactivated keycard, and a 1-line email. Your services are no longer required. Third, I began restructuring the leadership team, bringing in people who valued performance integrity and truth over optics and loyalty to a broken man. By the end of the week, half the old board was gone. The logo was archived, the branding process had begun. And for the first time in years, this company wasn't a monument to him. It was mine to rebuild cleanly, precisely, and without asking permission. I didn't make a big announcement. No headlines, no gloating, just quiet, deliberate moves. Systems, culture, vision. A company rooted in truth, not image. 3 weeks later, it made the evening news. The anchor's tone was calm, detached. In a surprising shift, the formerly male-led firm Virion has rebranded under new leadership. The company, now known as Sloan Systems, will focus on ethical growth and female-led innovation. The logo flashed on screen, minimal soft gray on white. Just my first name in a modern serif font. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was mine. Somewhere across the city, I imagined him watching, alone. On a couch in a rental apartment, no company, no house, no legacy. Just the quiet, sinking realization that the woman he dismissed now owned everything he once claimed. He sued me for half. But in the end, I took it all. People ask me if I feel proud now, if I feel vindicated, triumphant. They expect a smirk, a soundbite, a victory lap. But I don't feel like I won, because this was never about winning. It was about remembering who I was before someone tried to write me out of my own story. It wasn't about money, though I have more of it now than I ever imagined. It wasn't about control, though I now sit in rooms where my voice isn't just heard, it leads. And it was never about revenge. It was about correction, about holding up a mirror to a system, to a man, to a version of myself that once believed being quiet would make me safe. Sometimes I think back to when everything shifted. Not in the courtroom, not in the boardroom, but in the kitchen years ago, standing across from him, with hands trembling and a heart breaking, when he looked at me like I was nothing and said, "You're just the wife." I don't remember what I said back, if I said anything at all, but I remember the silence, the sting of it, the way it echoed louder than any insult could. And maybe that's why I never screamed, never ran to the press, never clapped back online. Because I learned something in that silence, it isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's where strategy is born. Sometimes it's where strength learns how to sharpen its edge. I didn't burn his house down. I didn't call him names. I didn't even say, "I told you so." I just rebuilt what he tried to take. And I didn't do it for applause. I did it for the women who come after me. The ones called just the wife, just the assistant, just the girl in the back. I started a foundation this year, a scholarship fund named after my mother, Eleanor's table. She never had a seat at one, but she taught me how to build one from scratch. The fund supports young women in business, especially those starting from zero or worse from behind. It covers tuition seed capital mentorship, It connects them to advisors who won't ask what their husband thinks before cutting a check. Because the truth is, there are thousands of women, like I used to be sharp, overlooked, essential. I'm tired of waiting to be noticed. To those women, I don't have flashy advice. No 5-step plan, no brand playbook. I just have this. Don't yell, don't beg, build. Quietly, relentlessly, strategically. And one day when they finally notice, let them choke on their own surprise.